Right, so this first panel is on food and nutrition and food security. I'm going to turn first to Hoonae Kim. Hoonae Kim is the Director for Asia and Pacific for the International Fund for Agricultural Development. She has a history of working in over 70 countries, providing advice and projects. IFAD is the United Nations only fund devoted to agriculture, so she's ideally equipped to share her thoughts today. Just briefly, tell us how you see this issue, you and IFAD.
Well, first of all, thank you very much for giving us this opportunity. Andrew, it's a delight to see you. We used to work together in our previous job. And ladies and gentlemen, amongst the CEOs and dynamic leaders and speakers, it's really humbling to be here, representing in some sense the government or the public side. IFAD, as Andrew briefly talked about, it is an international financial institution fully devoted to support finance, technological innovation, technical assistance, and policy advice. That is what we do in 175 countries. And our program is not small. We are not as big as other multilateral bank, but we are about $17 billion program. Therefore, we think we know something about what is going on with the smallholders around the world. And I say smallholders. And then Sunny and Andrew, you both mentioned the smallholders as both as a consumer, but a very important producers of the food that the world consumes. By 2050, you already mentioned that the world will have over 9 billion people. And as an Asian, and I talked a little bit about from where we are sitting, and of course as an Asian, I was astonished to hear from Gordon Conway that in the world of that time, in 2050, there will be still 1 billion people hungry. But what is more shocking to me is that half of them will be in Asia. So you look around Singapore and you can look around other marvelous cities in Asia in a rapid growth and the rapid reduction in the poverty. How could that be possible? This is the challenge for us. And some of you already discussed the SDG, Sustainable Development Goal, 17 of them, complicated, even more indicators. And you may not notice there are seven exactly that we feel the IFAD is a part of the solution, that we must become a part of the solution. But it was not easy even to put those in 7 and 8 indicators we feel it's relevant for the smallholder and agriculture and sustainable agriculture into that SDG. And there were lots of negotiation before we got to that. Now we know what the indicators are, now we know what the goals are, and we just have to get our sleeve, roll up our sleeves, and we just have to do it. I'd like to talk about a little bit on the partnership. All the challenges, despite the well-done part of it, there are challenges. The challenges part, we can't do it alone. The world is connected. Private sector is connected to your partner private sector. Government is connected to the government. And what we believe in the Multilateral Development Bank or part of a UN agency, we must, the public agency like ourselves, we must work with the private company. And there are many good examples. Private sector bring in innovations. Of course, you work for the profit. I don't think it's only the profit. There's an increasing and very positive signs that the companies do care about sustainability. The public sector, we work with the government. We bring public resources to those that is not obviously short-term profit, but we do believe in medium to longer term, we can generate that profit. But not just in the investment in a traditional sense. We invest in institution. We do an analytical work so that there are evidence to influence and hopefully change some of the distorted policies. And that is what we do. Some of the example I want to give to you, then some of your companies are involved. In Nigeria, we are working with Olam, with the rice farmers. Indonesia, we are working with Mars, 30,000 farmers growing cocoa. And in Vietnam, we are working with the private companies dealing with the coffee. India, we are working with Unilever, the Freshfield, and some of the other companies. And in fact, we want to work with all of you. So that's one of the reasons why we come here. And I have colleagues from IFAD in this room too, so that during the various opportunity, we want to hear what it is that we can bring as an international agency, part of the UN agency. And we also work with other multilateral development bank, World Bank, Asian Development Bank. In fact, we want to work so closely with other larger banks that our Philippine office, IFAD's Philippine office, will be moving in with the Asian Development Bank. How about that? As an extension of their agriculture operations. So I look forward to a good discussion with you. And again, just extremely delighted to be here. Thank you, Andrew.
Wonderful. Thank you very much indeed, Hoonae. Let me just explain. Yes, I think for their opening statement, we'll allow applause. And then when they talk to each other, we won't applaud you every time. And I hope we don't boo either. Let me just explain how we're going to operate. You have computers in front of you. They're not to take notes unless you want to. You can ask questions. And then it gets more sophisticated. The questions will actually come on the wall here, and you can vote on the questions. If you really like the questions, they will move up the list. At the end of the day, I choose whether or not we ask your questions. So do your best, try and make it as persuasive as possible. But let's really sort of try and probe a little bit some of these issues that are being raised. Let's turn to Pavan Sukhdev. Pavan was a banker by a leading financier. He was a managing director at Deutsche Bank, and some years ago he said, I need to engage in something very different because no one else is doing it. I want to really understand and help other people to understand how to value ecosystems and biodiversity. And he set up something called TEEB, the Economics of Ecosystems and Biodiversity, supported by UNEP, the United Nations Environment Programme. He's still an ambassador for UNEP. He just won the Blue Planet Award, which is a wonderful award for what he's done. And if you haven't read the reports from TEEB, he also wrote a book called Corporation 2020, which basically says, look, we've been thinking in a rather old-fashioned way about the way we run our corporations. So what's on your mind right now, Pavan?
Well, Andrew, thank you for that kind and long introduction. I think firstly, I'd like to welcome the people from the business world, from the agribusiness world, and particularly thank Sunny and Olam and his colleagues at Olam for organizing, and thank you all for being here. The reason for my book, Corporation 2020, was essentially to challenge ourselves into recognizing, firstly, how important we are. I'm sorry to put it bluntly. We are 65% of global GDP and jobs worldwide. We, in the US, are 75% of GVA and jobs. If we don't change the direction of the economy and its resource use, then who else will? And that was my challenge to my own colleagues, my own clients in the business world. I think if we go from the business world generally to the world of agribusiness, that challenge becomes even more intense because, as you've so rightly pointed out, when we look at the SDGs, let's say we look at SDG number 2, the hunger goal, we realize very quickly that without achieving sustainable fisheries, in other words, goal number 15, we won't get protein for the billion people who depend on fish as their main source of animal protein in the developing world. Without achieving proper land management, then we will end up with that extra 70% of calorie demand that you referred to, Andrew, resulting in 70% of land use extra, which from the 40% that we today used for land is, by my maths, another 28%, so that's another 30%. There just isn't that much land. So clearly, goal number 14, and then fresh water to provide the water to feed the crops. Goal number 6, and then we talk about health. So when we look at agriculture and hunger as the SDG, then we quickly realize that our business world in agribusiness is going to be responsible for engaging and solving with not just number 2 SDG, but also SDGs number 6, 13, climate, of course. The entire value chain of agriculture is the largest contributor to climate. 13, 14, 15, 6, and then 3, the health goals, and so on and so forth. And before you know it, you've kind of touched on almost everything, including, if I may say, the goals to do with women's empowerment and employment, because in Africa, more than 60% of the farmers are women, even though they don't own more than 5 to 30% of the land. So it is a huge challenge thrown to us as people involved in some way, and myself only tangentially, in the agribusiness world, to get our heads together and to provide solutions. And I think these solutions will come from perhaps two different directions. I think we had a lovely opening this morning where some of the technology orientation of the solutions was brought in, and perhaps, albeit only hinted, some of the sort of large-scale solutions were brought in. But I think we also need to worry and see how exactly the small scale and the smallholder plays out. So here's the reality, and these statistics come from the FAO, which is that of the 570 million farms around the world, 475 million are less than 2 hectares. That's like a typical backyard back in the US, for instance. And the reality about these 475 million small farms is that they employ more than 1 billion people. Many of them are in small developing and poor developing countries, where they provide more than 80% of the food in these food insecure regions. So they are incredibly important for the food sustainability and food security challenge. To me, of course, the biggest challenge here is the employment challenge, because there simply is no other solution. And I think this is a gradual awareness that is dawning amongst the governments in the developing world, that there really isn't an industrialized option to convert small farms into something else. Because what is the something else? It can't be steel, because that only employs less than 5 million people globally. It can't be auto, because that's about 6 million. It can't even be IT, information technology, because that's only about 7 million, 6.5 million. So how many global steel sectors, IT sectors, and car sectors are we going to have to be able to redeploy 1 billion workers in the developing world on small farms? The maths just does not add up. So I think gradually the governments in the developing world, and I'm referring here to Asia and sub-Saharan Africa, are increasingly conscious of the need to convert today's small farm into the only thing it can be, which is a better small farm, which delivers greater well-being for its workers. And when I say better, I mean higher yield, lower risk, because that is very important, and fairer price. So these are the three focuses which, in one way or the other, and by the way, as you know, they're all connected in with the SDGs, all of these issues of higher yield, lower risk, and fairer price. So I think this is going to be a key challenge, not just the agriculture, the sort of conventional large-scale agriculture, but also ensuring that the half of the food that's grown in these small farms in the world continues to be grown, but at better yield, lower risk, and higher, fairer price for the farmer. And my last point in introducing is, yes, congratulations on doing well. But there were 3 other, there was a bit of selection out there, Andrew, that you had. Because if you'd selected nutrition deficit or obesity or being overweight, the numbers would not have been that impressive. And let me say that these are big numbers as well. More than 2 billion people in the world today do suffer from nutrition deficit. And we're talking about basic nutrients like calcium, iron, potassium, vitamins D, B12, etc., folic acid, and so on. So that's a very large number of people. 1.9 billion are overweight, out of whom 600 million are obese. And of course, this is the sad part of it, which is that the 795 million that you mentioned as hungry, almost exactly compensated by those who have too much weight. So I think the health challenges associated with food are still big. And I think that's perhaps the main reason why we are still here. And I welcome all of us to coming out with creative answers. Today is just perhaps the start of a journey, but the Alliance, I'm sure, will have many such meetings as it progresses. Coming out with answers to these big challenges, I think, really is the purpose of our being here.
Great. Thank you. Thank you very much indeed, Pavan. I hope we're starting to get a few questions, I think, and they'll appear on the wall, on the screen in a minute. Please also probe if you disagree with anything. We've asked speakers to say things that actually not necessarily everyone will agree with. So please, let's try and get a good discussion going. Let's turn to Jeremy Oppenheim, who is sort of a one-man intellectual revolution in this space. He worked for McKinsey for 20 years, and then, a bit like Pavan actually, thought, I want to do something different, and has just created a new company called Systemic, precisely to look at systemic change. He was the director of a commission that we set up called the Global Commission on the Economy and Climate, and he's now the director also of the Business Coalition on the Sustainable Development Goals. Jeremy, you have great ideas for the future of agribusiness.
Andrew, thank you, and it's as everyone has said, it is an honor to be here, and particularly I think we're all humbled by the vision that was laid out this morning by Sunny and others. There is a huge set of challenges facing this industry. The role of the Business Commission on Sustainable Development is literally to do one simple thing, which is it's to take each of the challenges that you've heard today, from the greenhouse gases to the obesity issues to the biodiversity challenges to overexploitation of water aquifers. It is to take every single one of those and to think about how could these be opportunities for business. Because at the end of the day, having spent my 25 years at McKinsey,
wow,
I can tell you, and survived, I can tell you that the thing that gets business out of bed is typically there's a prize where we can actually do something real and get after opportunities and new markets and innovations and ways of doing things, not just technological innovations, but new business models that actually solve real problems out there in the world. So what I'd like to do is three quick things. One is to talk about the 8 or 9 opportunities that we see over the next 15 years that will go directly to creating the next era of this industry, generating profits and dealing and tackling the challenges posed by the SDGs. I want to talk a little bit about the GAA and the role that it could play. And I want to ask a question, which is about, is there really a burning platform for this industry to act not 5 years from now and 15 years from now, but to get on with it and act now, right? Because I think we all can imagine a possible different future, but it's another thing to say we're going to start now. So I want to talk about the burning platform. So those are the 3 things I'm going to do. So on opportunities, there's some work that will come out of the Business Commission in the next month or 2, and I'm just going to give you a quick preview of what it says. It's a report around the food and agriculture industry. Here are the top 9 opportunities. And some of them will be familiar. In fact, all of them will be familiar to someone in the room here. And I'm going to put some numbers against them just to give you a sense of the size of the prize. And as Sunny said at the beginning, the farm gate total production, 6 trillion, right? And that's, you can multiply it by 5 or 6 to get the total global, if you will, revenues. All the numbers I'm going to give you are not revenues, but they're value, right? So they're the economic profit that could be generated out of getting things right. Number 1, reducing food waste, right? Biggest of them all, right? We estimate it's worth between $300 and $600 billion a year. And these numbers are by around 2030, right? So you can play with them and bring them back to the current, but if we were to get after food waste seriously, it would be between $300 and $600 billion a year of additional value for this industry. That is a huge number. If you take the total bottom lines of all the major agribusinesses in the world, the bottom lines, it's a much bigger number than those bottom lines added all together. So 300 to 600 billion on food waste. Number 2, if this industry wanted to get into managing terrestrial carbon sinks, the forests, all the forms of managing terrestrial carbon at anything like a sensible carbon price, $40, $50 a ton, right? And that's not a massive, crazy price, is that, Andrew? Right? A sensible-ish price, $200 billion a year of value opportunity, right? Out of managing terrestrial carbon sinks. Number 3, if you want to go into really the 795 million people who are undernourished today, there are ways of entering the low-income food markets, right, and helping them grow with the right, if you will, products and services. That's another $200 to $250 billion a year. So that's number 3. Number 4, there's all sorts of ways of increasing yields and technologies in large farms, in small farms. I don't think this is either a debate about large farms versus small farms. That's a stupid horse race, right? Completely daft. We need both, and we need them both to perform at another level, right, over the next 15 years. So we reckon our estimates are about 150 billion of extra value from large farms, from technological applications, and another 100 to 150 billion from smallholders. That's number 4. Number 5, sustainable aquaculture, right? So really taking the fact that we will need to, and people will want to keep on, if you will, consuming fish from aquaculture, and that is, in one form or another, it's an incredibly important source of protein, and it's an efficient way of generating protein, but it has to be done sustainably. At least another $100 billion of value opportunity. Number 6, restoring degraded lands. Andrew, I know this is a huge topic for WRI. There are billions of hectares, and not all of them are equally productive, but there are ways of making that land more productive. And one of the things we learn is if you start managing land, and done well, it doesn't degrade, it gets better, right? And so we're talking about, again, somewhere in the $75 to $100 billion of value creation. That's opportunity 6. Number 7, cattle intensification, right? How do we do cattle rearing and management in a completely different way? And I'm going to make a point now which I'll relate to in my last kind of section 3 on the burning platform. There is a world out there in the energy sector that's called coal, right? And we needed coal to get us to this point in our, if you will, civilization. And we don't need it in the same way going forward. I'm going to be black and white about this, right? We do not need it in the same way. And there is a question as to what will be the coal of the food and agriculture industry, right? And will it be cattle, right? Because in some ways, it's a huge, huge driver of emissions, and it's a huge problem in health terms, right? And at some point, people are really going to wake up. So there's questions about how we change the approach to, if you will, cattle and the value chains all around that. We think that done differently is worth $40 to $50 billion a year. Number 8, urban agriculture. Huge opportunity. At one level, it's about, growing stuff in the city, peri-urban approaches to growing food and localizing food, but it's also about reconnecting consumers with nature and with how stuff is grown. People are so disconnected. All we do is we shop at a supermarket and pick it off the shelf. Actually re-establishing a relationship between people and food and how it's grown, I think has profound implications that go way beyond just the numbers. So that's another $25 to $50 billion of value creation. And then the last, and actually one of the biggest, is the reformulation of products, right, which is incredibly difficult. I am under no illusion about that's just sort of, go into the lab and shift things, because it's about taste and it's about value chains. But Andrew, you talked about 66% of consumers wanting something different. Now, whether that's the number across but it's happening, right? It is happening in spades, right? And some people are willing to pay nothing more, and some people are willing to pay a little bit. But that's a trend that can only go in one direction, because people will get more and more aware of the relationship between what they eat and their health. That is not a trend that is, let's debate whether it's going to get stronger or weaker. It is a trend that will go in only one direction. Our estimates of what that's worth, if you're a winner in reformulating what people actually eat, is $300 to $400 billion, right, of value, right, by 2030. So these are huge numbers. They add up to over $2 trillion of opportunity. Every single one of you will be looking at some elements of those. And those were just the top ones. We've got 15 more that are all in the 10 to 20. So look at the SDGs and don't go, oh my goodness, we're just about to get beaten up again for this and that. Yes, you will be. But on the other hand, right, every single one of them goes opportunity, if you think about it in the right way and you put numbers on it, and then we turn around and we say, okay, that's nice big macro numbers, and that's kind of the McKinseys, and that's what they do. Then we need to dig down to figure out how to win and actually create new markets and compete in a race for the top. So that's the prize. Over $2 trillion, more than the bottom line of the industry, all added together. So why not go for it? And if you want to just add one other thing to the kind of the prize bit of this, when we do numbers, and these are again back of the envelope, because it's very hard to actually, go and do everything at the kind of micro level. Our estimate is that if this industry went after these opportunities, you would find something in the order of 70 million new jobs that get created across the industry. Right now, in a world that is desperately looking for jobs, and Pavan, you made the point, we need jobs in the agriculture sector, and we need them to be good jobs, right? Alyssa Lynn jobs that can actually keep people excited to be on the farms and connected with their own communities. These are 70 million jobs that relate to building a better society overall and putting this industry at the heart of every element of what we need in terms of the world we want to create. So that is the work of the Business Commission, trying to figure out at a macro level. We haven't got all the expertise that you have in this room. This room is astonishing. I've never been in a room like this with as many people that know their way through all of this stuff. So how do you take the high-level estimates and the kind of numbers and direction that I'm offering and the Commission is offering and make the GAA the place that this then digs and drills down and down and down? I'm happy to stop here if you want, Andrew. I could take a couple more minutes. If it's up to you.
Well, we'll come back to you because everyone's wanting to hear about this burning platform. So we'll come back to you just a little while. Is that okay?
That's fine.
Great. Thank you. That was great. Okay, the questions are coming in. I noticed some sort of gaming going on. People are voting, and unfortunately, they were all looking at how these questions were moving around rather than listening to you, Jeremy. No, we really were listening to you. That was great. Let's start with number one, 26 votes. Sustainability has a cost. Who pays for it?
Can I have a go? I think we all want to go.
Yeah, we all want to go for it.
Well, would you like to go first?
Lady first. Yeah.
Well, since I am a member of the financing institution, that all of you, in fact, are contributing to the resources, because it is a contribution by the governments around the world. So let me put it, sustainability is ultimately it's a shared cost. But I do believe we are committed to do this because the aggregate benefit is going to be much greater than cost. And the cost of the short term to medium to the longer term, we need to differentiate that somehow. So I do believe, and when I said earlier, it has to be borne by all different stakeholders. The smallholder farmers we talked about, they are not waiting for government hands out. They are investing in their farm, they are investing in their family, they are investing in their future generation, and they pay tax. So at all levels, from the smallholders to the community, to the government, the region, and globally, private sector and public sector, we all have a stake in this. Now, exactly how the benefit is being shared, this is the really tricky one. So when we do a public resource injection to an investment, who will be the ultimate beneficiary of that? And this is where we looked at economic, not just the financial return. We also look at the social inclusion aspects of it, because the benefit needs to be shared, because we are responsible for public funds and how they are being utilized and how they are generating the benefit. So I give you my answer a little bit from the public aspects to it.
Great, thank you very much. And we're not going to ask all three of you to answer every question, so we'll go to Pavan then, and we'll move on to the next question. And you can sneak something in, Jeremy, later on.
This is my favorite question as well.
I know.
Because I say that
I saw you voting for it.
Yeah, I have a different perspective on this one. I say that unsustainability has a cost, and let me tell you what that cost is. Unsustainability has a cost of more than $2 trillion when it comes to climate. It has several $100 billion of costs when it comes to obesity. It has several more $100 billion of costs when it comes to being overweight. Some of which is borne by individuals, some of which is borne by National Health Services. It has huge costs when it comes to soil fertility and freshwater availability, which is one of the consequences of unsustainability. Destruction of soil quality, that's unsustainability. These are huge costs to actually agri-productivity, which we are all facing and all paying collectively. And the health costs, most of us, those who are not insured, and even those who are insured, pay personally. Those who don't pay that personally will pay taxes, as I have done all my life in at least 4 countries, pay taxes which then the government will use to bear these costs. Now, these are not referred to as the costs of food unsustainability. They are referred to as climate costs, health costs, water costs, soil costs, and there are 4 different ministries involved out here, maybe a 5th and a 6th one as well. Unfortunately, they originate from the value chain of food and agriculture. So when someone says, what's the cost of sustainability? I say, hang on, have you measured the cost of unsustainability? The cost of sustainability, whatever it might be, has to be offset by zeroizing the cost of unsustainability, which even by the estimates by the IMF and others, is into the several trillions of dollars per year. So let's not only look at visible costs, let's also look at the externalities, as I call it, the invisible costs. And let's understand that we are facing them, we are paying them. It's our taxes, your taxes and mine, that are paying for all these costs, either directly or because the government uses them to pay them.
That's great. Thank you very much. You want to sneak in a quick
No,
answer?
I'm very comfortable with what Pavan has said.
Okay, good. There are 3 questions that are essentially asking about changing consumption habits. The one that has 22 votes, what are the most effective way to encourage healthy eating? Another one with 8 votes, should we become vegetarian in order to meet our food and nutrition needs? And then with 6 votes, should we have cattle intensification or should we reduce consumption of dairy and meat? So I think they're all broadly in the same space. Who'd like to take any of those?
Well, I'm happy to start, right?
Good.
But it's hard. We should start with just a recognition that this isn't going to be, one silver bullet and we change people's consumption patterns. And I would be the first to acknowledge that. And as we all know, the rise of the middle class, the next 3 billion people will want to and will mimic some of the lifestyle patterns that they have aspired to for decades. So let's just recognize the underlying trend and the challenge associated with that. And so the easy thing for me to say was that that's going to happen, and now we need to educate people, and we educate people, right, starting with the kids. And that is also, by the way, absolutely true, right? So let's not underestimate the role of an intergenerational educational challenge that we have to take on. But I am going to throw one extra thing onto this, which is one thing that reliably changes people's behavior is you price things properly, right? It's not the only thing, but if you price things properly, things do change. So when people eat meat today, right, they're not paying the full cost of it, right? They're not paying the full cost of it in terms of greenhouse gas consumption. They're not paying the full cost of it in terms of water emissions. They're not paying the full cost of it in terms of water. They're not paying the full cost of it in terms of the energy that's taken to process everything all the way through, and nor are they paying the real cost of it when it comes to their health, right? So actually, and I'm going to add one other thing which may or may not be popular, but when we do the numbers, right, on subsidies that are not just the kind of externality stuff that floats out there in the air, but actual cash subsidies into agriculture, we are subsidizing agriculture to the tune of $500 billion a year. So a short answer to that is if we were serious about changing people's consumption patterns, we would get rid of these subsidies, both the explicit ones, right, and the implicit ones, and we would price food in a different way. Now that raises a series of complicated questions, because of course if you price food properly, it will be particularly challenging for poorer households. And so we'd have to work through and understand how to handle that. And there are technical answers to that, and But the short version is, over time, if we're serious about the environmental issues, if we're serious about the health issues, if you want to change consumption patterns, you actually have to, over time, move to putting the right prices on things.
Thank you. Hoonae.
I support everything you just said on the price signals, the right content. The nutrition, as you also mentioned, this food consumption has a two sides to it: undernourishment, the stunting, and the excessive calorie and the obesity. It's happening concurrently all over the world, including developing countries. So what are some of the things? Education, I think, is the key.
Absolutely, yes.
And incorporating the right kind of food into, say, school lunches. For example, in Bangladesh, there is a small fish called mola, which is very high in protein, that we work with the smallholder. And not only that, the rural children get it, now the urban children are getting it into school. So that this kind of education with the practical, what they get in the daily plate. And I think it's one thing. In India, the millet is another good example. And the science and the private companies are producing, increasing the nutrition kind of food, but we need to get it to the consumer in many different channels. And price is certainly is one, but I do believe starting early in a public services, public feeding program, and etc. And of course, the education. The one way we are handling the obesity side is that increasing awareness of the community to think back what their ancestors ate. Then you go to some of the remote islands and where there are issues of the overweight, they're eating a lot of imported ham and spam kind of things. So some of the effort of reintroducing indigenous crops and something that it really is nutritious and locally can be grown is another small area, but I think it's a concrete area of changing the consumption, production and the consumption.
Yeah.
Great, thank you. On the issue of should we intensify cattle farming or should we become vegetarian? I mean, well, at least eat less beef. I mean, we probably need to do both. Some people in this room are part of very exciting developments in the intensification of pastures. In Brazil, the average cattle has 1 hectare to roam upon. You can put 4 cattle on a hectare, but only if you intensify the grassland. The good news is you bring down enough carbon from the sky to almost offset the emissions of methane, the flatulence from the cows, not entirely. But there are some pretty exciting developments. And I think, as you're saying, I mean, the private sector has figured out how to persuade people to buy things. The private sector can also persuade people to buy different things and higher value things. And this is the trick, isn't it? I mean, essentially, what we want is people to eat less low value, high emitting food, more high value, that's where the profit will come, be healthier as well. We've just set up something called a Better Buying Lab, where we brought experts from the private sector who know how to influence behavior to try and shift the diet. So if you ate beef, once less per week, that would have a massive impact. And you'd become healthier as well. Yeah. Could we move to...
But before we do, that's a great point, Andrew, because we are talking now about public interest advertising in a world in which, let's say, Unilever spends $6 billion a year advertising, Nestle, $4 billion. I'd like to ask, how much does any government spend on advertising related to food? Yeah. Surely they should start.
Yes. Very good point. I'd like to turn to a couple of questions relating to technology. We had an amazing introductory vignette from Alyssa Lin, who we sort of talk about as if she's a real person, I've noticed. She was made up, I think, yeah. But she certainly had a very optimistic view of the future of technology. And I think we probably do too. There's a question here, does the panel think that CRISPR technology can deliver real benefits for smaller producers and overcome public fears about GMOs? There's another one here about how do we accept 11 votes, GM crops, particularly for human consumption, still looked upon with suspicion. What can the industry do to improve acceptance? So the broader question on technology, who wants to take that?
Well, Andrew, I think in principle, I sit on the side which goes, these technologies coming through are amazing. right? So I start there, and then my instinct says, yeah, but I would have said the same thing 10 or 15 years ago about GMO, because I'm kind of a techno-optimist kind of guy. And what we have learnt about that is that to get these technologies to play and succeed requires incredible investment, as much investment, if, in a sense, in building social understanding and acceptance and recognizing that people have legitimately real questions about all of this. Often because they simply don't understand what these technologies mean, and they you know, are concerned about, you know, all sorts of, if you will, you know, trade-offs or motivations that are not well kind of articulated. So I think that there's a kind of a simple to say but hard to execute two-step dance here. We absolutely need these technologies. We absolutely need to transform the extent to which there is transparency, right, around these technologies, around what they mean, around what they could possibly create in terms of upside, in terms of risk on biodiversity or on any other elements. There needs to be a place, and this is of course something that the GAA, in principle, right, with the right setup, could be at the heart of, right? I think people out there, and this has nothing to do with the agri-business, are generally a bit distrustful, not a bit, a lot distrustful about a number of these technologies and who's really benefiting from them and how's it going to play, and will the smallholder be at the end of the day the victim of it as opposed to the beneficiary. These are naive questions. They are thoughtful questions from people who actually care about a better outcome. So one of the things that the GAA could be right in the middle of is creating the transparent, open dialogue around these new technologies that will come in waves. CRISPR is just one of 100 of these things, right? They will come in waves over the next 20 years. And if we are going to take advantage of them, which we absolutely have to do to meet the challenges we've talked about, then we've got to create a different, if I can use the language, social technology, right, for the dialogue that has to happen to drive acceptance.
Great. Anybody want to take on the CRISPR technology?
Rather than CRISPR specifically, because it may or may not deliver expectations. But technology, I think one point I'll make is that we forget that not all technology is high-end biotechnology. There's also low-end technology. And I'm reminded of a study that was done by Jules Pretty and others in 2006. I have the details here. They studied just common sense sustainable practices applied, like low tillage or no tillage farming and reusing farm water, using farm manure, looking at different common sense techniques, or for that matter, rotating crops and using selection and variations of strands in order to reduce crop losses to pests, et cetera, et cetera. 286 sustainable farming projects of this kind across more than 50 countries, more than 12 million farms. Net result, observed pre and post intervention, an average increase in yield of 79%. And this is statistically significant. We're talking about 37 million hectares of land covered by these farms. So these are simple technologies which, in theory, companies and business models which focus on value chain integration and value chain improvement and aggregation, there's nothing to stop them from using such technologies and disseminating such technologies appropriately to improve their own value chains, both in quality and quantity. So I think we need to look at technology with a more broad hat than just biotechnology.
Thank you.
Just to add one. First of all, I think using the technology the way it's evolving, the social technology has a huge role to play. Just to give an example, yes, there is a strong debate and mistrust about GMO, and simply because the information is not being disseminated. So what we are now doing is, in increasingly many remote rural areas, giving them a tablet. Now, if they have a Wi-Fi access, I hope Google will one day make it a global Wi-Fi, and what they do is the extension workers are now, it's no longer just a technical thing, it's the usage or the different value chain or different opportunity and etc., all the way to the consumption. So I think the technology has a very different role to play than especially the application, the usage of the existing technology. Another one that technology is playing in a phenomenal role is in a most remote area, connectivity, not only to the information, but the logistic movement and the goods and services, especially for the perishable goods. These are playing in leading to the reduction in the losses, delivering the consumer goods in a much more efficient way. So I see the role of a technology. I know we're not talking about just the crisp technology here, but the role of a technology, especially in an applied sense in a developing country, is absolutely phenomenal.
I mean, I think there's a link between these technology questions and the first question about the cost of sustainability. And I absolutely agree with what everyone said about the cost of unsustainability. I do a lot of work in the energy sector, right? And it's worth kind of moving out of the ag sector for a moment and just looking at, I think, Andrew, you would recognize this as well. I mean, half a dozen years ago, the idea that, renewable energy technologies, wind and solar as examples of those, could be competitive with fossil fuel-based technologies in the power sector was inconceivable, right? It just was not in people's frame of reference, right? And therefore, the cost of having clean energy was something that was not, frankly, was a high cost, and we would debate how high it was and the business as usual and, all these incredible technical things. And today, right, the cost of clean energy, wind and solar, differs from one country to the next, right? Let's not pretend that it's all, beating fossil fuel everywhere. But you go to Texas today, right, which is, gas hub of the world, right? And wind technology beats gas in the auctions, the open auctions that the Texan energy regulator has set for the next round of power generation. And it's coming in at 3-4 cents a kilowatt hour, right? So the answer to a lot of these questions is we absolutely have to get these technologies, low and high tech, coming through, right? We have to help people understand what these things are. We will have to scale them, right? Just as has happened in the energy sector. Some of that scaling will have to involve a level of support from the public sector to get these technologies and these new technologies through to scale. We all, those of us that come, if you will, from the sustainable background, have to acknowledge that some things are more sustainable and are actually more cost effective. There are win-wins. And there are other places right now where there aren't win-wins. And again, what could the GAA do, right? It could be really laying out a roadmap which says, here are the technologies that we have right now, right, that could actually drive win-wins if they were scaled right now, right? Here are the other ones that we see 5-10 years out, which we would need to get to scale down the cost curve, right? But that we think are highly promising. And if we do that, right, we can create more win-wins between the sustainability agenda and underlying cost performance, which everybody cares about because we want cheap, affordable, but high-quality food.
Great.
So that's how we have to put these things together.
Thank you very much. We're sort of heading into the final straight now. We've got 19 minutes more. So short answers from now on. And let's think of the number one, 25 votes. What are the 2 to 3 key steps to reduce food waste? And while you're thinking about your crisp answers, let me give you one. Measure it in a consistent way. We've just, together with the Consumer Goods Forum, worked for the last 2 years on a protocol to measure food loss and waste in a consistent way, exactly the way we did 15 years ago on how to measure greenhouse gases. We've got to measure, and so take a company like Tesco. Dave Lewis, the head of Tesco, had the courage to say, we every year are going to report on how much food loss and waste within our own care. And so this year, he reported it actually gone up to 55,000 tons from 54,000 because they got better at measuring it. He has the guts to say, I'm going to measure it, I'm going to tell you exactly how many lettuces get destroyed. And because of that, he's going to drive down food loss and waste. And obviously for the agribusiness business, it's going to be much more in the food loss. And that's where I'd like to hear from Hoonae. What's the one thing you would do at IFAD to reduce food loss and waste?
Well, the IFAD, my personal, I'm from Korea. It costs money to throw away garbage at a household level. It tremendously reduces the food garbage.
You have to pay to throw.
Because you get a one bag as your municipal services. But if you go additional bag, you have to pay for it. And it's a pretty steep cost. So the average housewives, or I'm not talking about restaurant waste is still there, but they still have to pay. So basically, in addition, in addition to the cost of producing that good, which is already a society and company has absorbed, it actually costs, creating the waste has a cost of higher disposal. And individuals pay for it. Now that's a public policy and seems to have worked.
Good. Unfortunately, in the United States, you have disposals and you just put it down the sink, and so
That's
you don't have to pay anything. So I prefer Korea. Pavan.
It's not really my space, but I will say this because I get involved in it. The kitchen. One, don't overstock the fridge. I sound as if I'm speaking with my daughters because this happens all the time. Don't overstock the fridge. Number two, cook. So this also happens with my daughters. Dad lands up, immediately goes to the fridge, puts on the apron and starts cooking because I'm just fed up with things falling out of the fridge. So these are my two favorite things.
Great.
Don't overstock, cook.
Jeremy.
Two things. One is we actually need I think a public-private initiative around some of the upstream stuff. I mean, the fact that a third of the food is wasted between farm gate and the manufacturer, I mean, it's shocking, right? And it's happening in the developing countries, which most need, a reliable food secure upstream in their logistics system. There are all sorts of particular reasons why it happens. I think we need to shine a really bright spotlight on it. And again, it's a GAA territory. Why not think about what could be the initiative? Is this something that we should get on the map with, the various, multilateral banks and others, with the private sector coming in? There's investment requirement, there's some regulatory shifts that are needed, but this is a big, big, big space. So number one, do that. Number two, don't just measure the volume, measure the value, right? So there are technologies out there that allow you to know exactly how much in monetary terms you waste in catering. And catering margins across the world, the net margins are 2 to 3%. If you fix the food waste in industrial business-to-business catering, you move margins from 2 to 3% by up to another 1 to 2 percentage points, because that's how much is being thrown away. So don't just measure volume, put a price on it.
That's great. Yeah, I do think for pre and post harvest, those of us that have worked in the multilateral banking business, I worked on this 30 years ago, and projects failed. And so we sort of gave up, and they failed because we worked with ministries of agriculture that didn't have the capacity, extension services didn't have the capacity, the private sector was nothing to do with it apart from the farmer, but the farmer was not empowered to do the right thing. Now, with the GAA, the things that we could do, I mean, it would not be difficult to set up $1 billion fund that would come from donors that could work with the private sector to really make this work. The rates of return are huge in this. And I'm looking at Sunny now because he's one of the members of something that's been set up called Champions 12.3. 12.3 is the number of the SDG target to halve food loss and waste by 2030. And we realize that it's not just sort of technical things, there has to be a political and powerful thing. So there are ministers of agriculture, there are heads of, Paul Pullman's a member as well. And so to try and sort of push this forward politically and in the media and everything, because it's the rate of return. The United Kingdom discovered by every dollar they put into reducing food loss and waste, the economy gets $60 back. Let's move on to the next one. I wonder if we could take the one a little bit down, the number 9 votes. Feeding the world's hungry may not be a profitable proposition for the commercial enterprise. What are your thoughts on managing this conflict, investors' expectations, and sustainable goals? And I wonder if we could just tweak that a little bit to include the issue of private companies versus publicly held companies? Because in this business, there are quite a lot of private companies. To some extent, it's easier for them because they don't have the quarterly urgency. A company like Mars, obviously, is privately held, so is able to have, just get on with it if you like. On the other hand, Sunny is a public company with some pretty tough and pretty big shareholders, and yet they're saying, yeah, we want to last for 1,000 years. So do you have any insights on this?
Well, I'll just make the obvious analogies from other industries. It's extremely, of course you look at it and you say, you're serving the bottom end of these markets, can't possibly be profitable in the short term. And there's a challenge. And I'm, again, not going to tell you that there's, a fortune to be made overnight. However, I will also tell you that the mobile phone industry took a different line, right? And they have done if people had said to you that the mobile phones would be in the hands of very poor people across the planet, and that they would have found a business model to do it that was profitable and that would be growing and that would be creating all the forms of both economic and social positive outcomes they had. If you'd said that 10 years ago, people would have thought you were crazy. The fact that we've now got the mobile phones connecting in with the energy industry, right, so that you can create leasing models, pay-as-you-go models, right, for renewable energy off-grid, is incredible, right? Because this is what these technologies like M-Copa and the like are doing. And again, all of these things. So what very innovative companies are doing is creating different business models across energy and mobile telephony and now water services, right? All at the pay-as-you-go, very low end of the market. And so, yeah, maybe it's going to be difficult. I bet you there are people in this room looking to figure out ways to crack it and connect in with those sets of technologies in such a way that we begin to find the link between water, energy, food. Oh, they seem linked to me, right? Telephony. How do we get these things to come together? Go and talk to those other industries, figure out how they've done it, and turn them into business models. And I have absolute confidence that there are at least a dozen people in the room who will figure out an answer to that question.
And very quickly,
Go ahead.
I'd just like to say that feeding the world's hungry is more often than not an issue of public distribution systems failing and there being no alternative. So I'd say invest in private distribution systems. There are really good ones for all kinds of other products going right down to the village level. And I see no conflict in governments delegating to the private sector a public task. After all, it's the private sector that builds roads and bridges for them. So this is maybe a mindset challenge where sometimes the willingness to let go of this doesn't come easily, but it needs to be worked upon. Again, it's psychology and mindset change that we need here.
Thank you.
May I add one last point? I'm not, from my perspective, that question itself, that feeding the hungry is higher cost than the revenue for the private company. That's what I read that way. I fundamentally disagree.
Yeah.
It may be the case due to the inefficiency of a distribution system and so on. But you go to village, you have a thriving local market. Nobody is subsidizing one another. You produce good food, and you are able to sell. So if the small farming business can be profitable, if the large commercial farm cannot be profitable feeding those folks, then there's some another efficiency in the system. So to me, I know the global hunger people is going down, but we also know that this is a persistent issue, and we need to figure out where that choke is. But I don't believe it's the feeding the hungry people itself is a non-commercial. I think it can be a very profitable venture.
Great, thank you very much. Can we turn to the one that has 21 votes? There's a need for it, and Pavan obviously talked about this, but also I'd like to hear from Hoonae. I think your organization has done more innovative work on this than anybody else. How can we make this happen? This is an area where we cannot be proud for the past achievements on smallholders. Some can, but overall. So maybe Hoonae and then Pavan.
Well, thank you. I didn't plant that question, did I? No, that's very good. Thank you very much. Even having this opportunity to talk about smallholders. The smallholder farmers, less than, we say, 1 hectare, depends on the countries, and availability of arable land. Indeed, they are I don't want to use the term trapped, but they are in a location where land availability, water availability, the natural resource availability to grow crops are limited. But what we are doing now is a part of the solutions that we don't have individual farmers working on his or her own. There is a groups of farmers, the India self-help group, the Vietnam, we have a groups of farmers working together. We are promoting the value chain, where a lot of losses in between through the system can be recaptured back to the producers. And that empowerment element of the smallholder is taking place. Another example is we go into a country that's emerging, recently opened, Myanmar, let's take an example. The private land ownership is not there. So what do we do? Taking the private ownership and the legal system, it takes time. So we work with the local government and the central government, giving them the lease right. I mean, just as a first step. Another step will be giving the ladies, the women and the girls, of inherited rights to the lease right, or in countries where we have land ownership, give them the right to inherit as well. So there's a lot of practical examples that how we empower the smallholders, individual, men and women, and then girls. And we talked about energy a little bit, and it is related to smallholders. We are using biogas from intense livestock production, and there's a much more positive externalities happening. And I give one example, then I'll pass it on to another panel member. Having a biogas in the kitchen or in the house, be able to light the room in the darkness, reduce the number of hours the youngsters or household have to travel to gather the fuel wood or the spend money on kerosene lamp, and et cetera, et cetera. So what happens? There are more hours in their hands, so they spend more time, think about what is good for their family, the various other externality. And also studying more.
Studying for children.
Studying more is better aware, et cetera, et cetera. So to me, even a simple thing as a biogas technology in a very simple format, which we are putting 4 or 5 millions in China alone, and another million plus in the Mekong and more in South Asia. This is a terrific way of empowering smallholders.
Great. Thank you very much.
Thank you. That's excellent. In fact, I agree with all your points. Excellent litany of things that can be done, each of which in some way or the other involves the appropriate level of government and policy. I just need to, perhaps from my side, add two which point to microfinance. Storage makes a huge difference, and sometimes what you need for storing of grain and fruit is not expensive. We're talking about $100 and $25 and so on. And the other is that supporting so this is very much something that can be done for smallholders, providing the right microfinance support groups and the finance for that. And the other is transition and extension, because many of them may intend to transition to high yielding crops or intend to transition to more sustainable crops with a better price. But you need that initial period of suffering where you need to not use pesticides and fertilizers for 2-3 years. By the time you get your community-based organic certification or whatever, and that kills you because you don't have the finance for that.
Yes.
So I think that targeted microfinance for these two things, storage and transition, I think would really help.
That's
as well.
great. Thank you very much indeed. We didn't do the one with the most votes yet, 25, which is food and nutrition are important, but what about the non-food agricultural crops? And I'm sorry that this panel was on food and nutrition, so that's why I'm afraid we have been talking about it, but I hope nobody up here thinks that that's somehow more important than some of the other things that agriculture produces. Does anybody, I think it's probably a very brief answer to this, anybody like to say anything? If we incorporated your proposals on valuation, and Peter Backer later on today, and the World Business Council just last week launched a really wonderful new protocol for incorporating the natural capital into accounts of companies, that would certainly help.
And it is about balance, I think, is the key word there, and recognizing that there will be some degree of land use competition that takes place, but it needs to be managed with the right policy frameworks with help in doing that.
Yes, thank you. Jeremy, before we close, I would like to give you the chance to say what you were going to say, that we cut you off at the beginning. You said, is there a burning platform out there? Do you want just to say how you were going to provoke us before this session ends?
Thank you, Andrew. Provoke you for the coffee break. Look, I would like the main message that you walk away with from at least my observations being one of immense opportunity for the companies and the leaders here who are bold about the possibilities that sit in front of us. So I don't want that to be lost in the comments I'm now going to make. There is an immense set of, I think, highly profitable, exciting, innovative plays to make. There is a flip side to the coin, and there always is, which is, so what if you don't really take that challenge on? What if you say, all right, well, actually the industry's okay, and I'm going to stay with it roughly the way it is, and we'll make incremental, a little bit of improvement every year. And I would argue that this is the time to be bold, in part because of just the degree of opportunity, but in part because there is a downside of not acting. And the downside is not just all the kind of SDG language, which kind of can, I think, overwhelm everybody. It overwhelms me from time to time, right? But it is, I think, worth considering what has happened in one other sector. And very interestingly, Sunny, right at the beginning, talked about how energy was, over the last century, geopolitical, right? That it attracted everybody's attention. Wars were fought over energy. They may still be, but they certainly were. And in the next century, maybe it's going to be food and agriculture and the broader uses of land. What I would say to you, having spent much of my life in the last 20 years working with the energy industry, is that they have started to wake up to the real change that's happening, but they've woken up very late, right? And they've woken up at a point where if you were in the coal industry, you will have seen your share price and your market valuation crash over the last few years. If you were a European utility, right, your value has halved in the last 5 years. If you're an oil and gas company, your value has absolutely underperformed the general market index, but you're in some sense surrounded today by all sorts of, I'll use it, not just critics coming from the NGO sectors and all the worthies, right, but from governments, from Mark Carney and the Financial Disclosure Task Force. These guys are suddenly being confronted with the need to say, how is your company and how is your industry going to demonstrably be consistent in its strategies and its investment plans with a 2-degree world, right? And that's very much on the environmental 2-degree thing, but they're going to then get questioned about local air quality as well as global quality. And look what's happening with the auto industry and with Volkswagen and the others. These are not kind of badly intentioned companies. These are companies that in one form or another have been enormously important in the way in which the world economy has operated, will remain enormously important, right? But they haven't taken on board the real challenges and the change that is taking place out there in society and out there on the back of our understanding of the science on the environmental side and our understanding on the science on the human health side. And that is an industry today that I think is truly struggling to go from, if you will, where it was, right, to being an industry that can see itself not as victim of all these people attacking it, but as absolutely part of the solution.
Right.
And that is the opportunity that sits here, I think, for GAA and for all of you, which is don't wait 10 years to be vilified and become, if you will, seen as part of the problem. Seize the moment now and be an active force for being explicitly part of the solution and taking these opportunities forward.
Great.
That's what's there for you.
Thank you. A wonderful way to end. A great thing to discuss over coffee. Thank you for all your questions. Sorry we couldn't get to all of them. Thank you for a wonderful discussion here. Hoonae Kim, Pavan Sukhdev, Jeremy Oppenheim. Let's give them a round of applause.